forget my time.
Yeah, that actually getting led astray is so easy. Reading these articles, I'm reading to kind of refresh what I, read and highlight it a bit, and then exactly you lose track of time. Anyway, welcome everybody to Talking Niagara this morning. It's 20th of August. I always think 20th. When you get to the 20th, it's like they're now in the last third of the month. It's like, is it a point when you should be kind of saying, well, what have I achieved this month?
Well, I'm a little bit lucky because right now I'm doing the school supply drive with Staples and Kiwanis, where we're in the stores trying to encourage people to give donations for the school supply drives. So that's kind of keeping me a little bit occupied. I'm trying to. Well, there's just been two of us basically.
That's your time at this time of year, isn't it? You're always doing that drive.
Yes, yeah. And I just like to say I bumped into an old pal of ours, William O'Sullivan, yesterday. His ride to work. He just got a brand new job, and his ride bailed on him about 10 minutes before he put out a plea for can somebody help me get to work or I'll lose this job. Luckily I saw it. It was on a Facebook feed, and I just kind of contacted him and said, "Look, I can get you there if you want." And I did. I took him to his job, picked him up in Welland, and took him to Thorold, where his job was and his equipment. So, what?
That's good of you.
Well, you know what? I've been there. I was an itinerant worker as well. Like he goes from house to house and stuff like that and paints. Well, I went to factory, and I know what it was like if you didn't have transportation. It could have made a huge amount of difference, and he would have lost his job if he didn't show up.
So because those kind of temporary jobs tough. Yeah.
Yeah, and he said to me, "You know what? I haven't talked to you in 3.5 years," and I didn't really even realize how long it had been. Anyway, one of the stories we have today is brings that right to the surface because I had talked to Sully yesterday, and of course he is an activist who tries to bring attention to abused children. He himself was one. Sully has quite a few very interesting stories. He's a powerful advocate for abused children, and anyway, I mean he gets ignored by the press a lot, and nobody talks to him, and from the press. Probably because those powers that, like the Catholic Church and other institutions that have found themselves in the midst of a crisis are more powerful than him, and have more influence over the press.
Yeah. Well, okay. So first of all, stories we were going to be covering. Okay, so hang on.
Well, an interesting one about Ontario.
Get Sully to work. Well done, Dave, says Chris Simone.
Oh, yeah. Well, it wasn't a big deal. I'm a retired guy, and I had the time, and I had the vehicle, so it wasn't a big deal.
So Chris is coming today from Silvertown.
Silvertown? What's happening in Silvertown?
Yeah. Okay. So Ukraine creating a new buffer zone at Kursk. I don't know if you saw over the weekend, but they've blown up a couple of bridges now. Maybe be at a couple more.
Yeah, this is a very, very interesting development in the Ukraine-Russia war. The Ukrainians have taken a risk. They have taken a gamble. They've taken some of the best troops and attacked Russia in Russian territory in and around. And it's kind of fitting too, because Kursk was the location of the largest and most disastrous tank battle in history. There was the Germans and the Russians fought a tank battle there. It could have gone either way. It finally went the Russian way. One of the turning points of the war, and it was a bloody mess. Basically, when you think of the Battle of Kursk, you might as well think of 5 battles of the Bulge, basically, because that's how enormous it was. We keep forgetting that 8/10 of the war happened on the Eastern Front, the European theater, and 50 men died for every U.S. soldier that died in the U.S. in the war, or at least I think it's about 410 or 415 U.S. people died during the Second World War. About 50 times that many died in the Soviet Union. So so unfortunately, we're having this battle again. It was a big gamble by the Ukraine. Whether it's going to work out for them, I don't know. What they've done is a very, very clever, but I don't know if it's a sustainable attack. So they've plunged into Russian territory, taken out some bridges and stuff, and they're holding some territory, making it very difficult for the Russians to resupply their armies. However, the Russians have a lot bigger army than the Ukrainians do, and they have a constant supply of weapons from Iran and North Korea, and probably some even from China. So and they have incredible capacity to manufacture weapons of war. So I don't know. I just want to see this thing over, get it over with. It's a stupid war, and the only thing I could see going forward is there's going to be some kind of armistice. And I've said this before. It's going to be like a DMZ, like in North and South Korea. There's going to be an armistice, not a peace treaty, and that's what's going to happen. There's going to be an armistice, and Russia's going to keep the territory it has so far acquired.
Yeah, and what I'm curious about these bridges. So they've knocked out a segment of each of these bridges, not the whole bridge, right? So it means that they can actually rebuild those bridges. Take away and start rebuilding.
But they could be using the same tactics as Lawrence of Arabia did back in 1917, where they didn't destroy a bridge, they damaged it. Yeah. If they damage the bridge, then it's harder for the opposition to rebuild one. What's going to happen with the Russians is they're going to put pontoon bridges out there for the meantime, because it'll be too difficult for them to fix a damaged bridge. If the bridge is completely gone, they just build a new one. It's easier, apparently.
I see what you're saying. Yeah. I just thought if they'd have taken 2 or 3 tiers out in the center, that would have been a lot more difficult.
Yeah. There's methods by which they sorry. Yeah. There's methods by which they figure this out. Should we take out the whole bridge? Obviously, they could have. If they took out part of it, they could have taken out the rest of it.
Yeah.
So why they leave it damaged is for some reason it's harder to fix a damaged bridge than it is just to make a new one, I guess. And of course, every time they fix it, it's going to get blown up again, at least in the short term.
I would have thought that the biggest thing to attack in a bridge would be one of those center pylons. I don't know. Support beam for the bridge.
Yeah, I don't know, but what is happening is an extension of this war. This is a bold gamble by the Ukrainians to plunge into actual Russian territory. Why the Russians weren't prepared for this, I don't know. It seems to me an obvious thing that could have happened, and anyone who is looking at war.
They're claiming the Ukrainians are claiming they wanted to create a buffer zone in the aggressor territory to kind of, I guess, cut off supply lines, at least temporarily.
Yeah, they may even use it as a bargaining chip because this war has got to come to an end sooner or later. it's a massive strain on the U.S. Treasury, and I think, and the Europeans are not really enthusiastic about the war itself. I don't think. I think this war, the faster it comes to conclusion, the better. It's a bloodbath. The Russians and Ukrainians are losing a lot of men. They're losing a whole generation of young men. That is absolutely stupid.
Yeah.
So put this thing aside. I mean, if you have to have an armistice, there's going to have to be some sort of peace or some sort of negotiation somewhere along the line, because the U.S. is extremely in debt, and to keep supplying the Ukrainians with massive amounts of weapons is a strain on the U.S. Treasury and their resources, which makes them less able to focus on the threat of China if they're tied up in all these little brush fire wars. And this actually is a major brush fire if you want to do that. And they're also dumping huge amounts of munitions in Gaza. Sadly, there's no morality here at all. It's just, hey, what advantage can we get? And people dying is our least problem. We can say that, oh well, we got to stop this because people are dying and are suffering. That seems to be really the least amount of their considerations. It's I don't know, trade. I seriously, I don't know why they motivated this war, why they instigated Ukraine to become part of UN, or not the UN, but the NATO.
NATO, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, in fact, they, would like to see that all back down, but isn't going to.
Yeah, and look how they turned their back on Georgia. They were going to bring Georgia and Ukraine into NATO. Ukraine owns the eastern part of much of the eastern part of the shoreline of the Black Sea, and Georgia was on the west part.
The other way around.
Yeah. So when they said, or on the eastern part, yeah, you're right, and they were looking like they were going to invite Georgia into NATO, and it was crushed by the Russians right away. If they just left it alone, man, leave it alone. Now Georgia is suffering. They're not going to get their autonomy, and nobody cares about them because they're too small. But Ukraine is a bigger deal. And
Ukraine, according to Mike, Ukraine said they have some more surprises upcoming.
Yeah, you know what? But they only have limited surprises because they are so small. The fact of the matter is, Russia's a much bigger country. It has much more resources to it. The resources coming to Ukraine are sometimes they're coming, sometimes they're not. They're up to the debate. They're slow in getting there. The amount of weapons they give them are, just so many. And I don't know. The war will escalate, and that is a very bad thing. Let's bring it to an end. Get an armistice. Whatever we have to do, stop.
Well, the worst about this war is that the last year or so, it's been grinding on. There's not really been, it's been grinding down and killing people on both sides without any real movement.
Well, the Russians are winning for the most part because of our attrition. So when they go into a battle, and they kill 10,000 Ukrainian soldiers and take 10,000 or even 15,000 losses themselves, they're reducing the amount of Ukrainian soldiers. And the Ukraine is drafting people that are 45, 50 years old, and because they can't fill their army up.
Yeah.
How long before we're going to get mercenaries in there, Western mercenaries? This has to come to a stop. This is stupid. Really, really stupid. And I can't see why the major powers can't just figure that one out. This is stupid.
Oh, yeah.
And all it is leading to suffering and more suffering. And every day that it lasts, another young man is going to die. Many young men are going to die. And that's going on both sides of this issue. So let's find a way of stopping the bloodshed. And I've said this over and over again. This is a needless war. It should not have happened.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so Ford is reopening the door to green energy.
Yeah, this is rather amazing. When Ford got into power, first thing he did is he scrapped 750 renewable energy projects that were on the books. Now it turns out, but now they're reversing that. They're going to put more green power on the grid than exists now. Existing now is 48 or 4,900 megawatts of power available to the province through renewables, wind and solar.
And they want to add 5,000 megawatts.
Yeah, they want to more than double that over the space of a few years. And of course, I think that's a great idea. Now, they say they scrapped the original thing because the Liberals were giving too many sweetheart deals to those people who were erecting turbines or solar panels. And it's true. It cost Ontario an incredible amount of money. Sometimes they were paying out 8 times the average cost of power from other resources to renewables. Typically 3 to 4 times. If you own a wind turbine and you built it before the Ford government got in, you're getting about 3 times the amount for your power than any other resource. So if you're paying $7 per megawatt hour, whatever it is, and 7 cents per megawatt hour, you were paying 21 to 30 cents per megawatt hour from wind and solar.
The whole point about green energy is it's supposed to be cheaper.
So the Ford government says that it has a plan for that, and it's going to make it no more sweetheart deals to kickstart the initiative.
Yeah,
that's what the Liberals. That was the Liberals' explanation why they gave such sweetheart deals. It says they wanted to kickstart the program. However, they were stuck after that giving out sweetheart deals all over the place.
Yeah.
So the Ford government stopped it. Now they're beginning it again and saying they're going more to a competition, and they're not going to give sweetheart deals. They're going to put it out there.
Why should they give sweetheart deals? Because the sweetheart deals were costing us in energy prices.
Yeah, and once the Liberals started, they couldn't stop it because.
And Mike and I are on this same thing. We need smaller, more efficient turbines. We need to rent roofs off places, and people then put solar panels up. And I'm generally with Mike. I think we need the vertical turbines, not the horizontal, not those great big fans. The vertical turbines are way more efficient. They use them. There's actually ships run on these vertical turbines now, vertical wind turbines.
Well, I tell you how effective solar and wind can be. That sailing boat I was on from the Azores to Lisbon, one of my friend owns. He's got a solar panel array at the back of the ship, at the back of the boat, over top of his dinghy, his safety dinghy. That gives him enough power to run the whole ship, and that's lights and is all equipment, the radar equipment and everything is more than enough for the 3 of us that were living on that ship. And he also has a little wind turbine attached to it. So anytime the wind's up, that little turbine spins and adds more to the battery bank. So there is potential there for a lot of power. But one of the things that I noticed in the article is that 150 communities have already said they're not good. They don't want it. They're not going to be. It's a NIMBY thing, not my backyard. We don't want any wind turbines.
That's why we don't want those ugly, massive, great wind turbines. That's why we should have the vertical turbines. They're not ugly, right? and they're comparatively low to the ground.
Well, for some reason, the big ones, those big Samsung ones, I think they're built by Samsung, or at least the generators are. For some reason, they're the ones that are picked, and you see the same ones all over North America and in Europe as well.
Well, not just Europe as well. Yeah, exactly. All across Europe, it's the wrong direction that they've gone in. Because many of those things are bad for birds.
Yes.
They're
bad. They're bad for migratory birds. Severely bad for migratory birds. Although more birds die in cities, flying through cities, than they do on the turbines, but still a massive amounts through the turbines. And that seems to be something that nobody really thinks of. Even the Gwyn and the McGuinty government kind of put that on kind of ignored that. Well,
that's why
anyway, I think though that the fact that the Ford government is the one that is expanding the renewable projects in such a big way, and with a less of a dollar impact on the price of power.
Yeah,
there are two things that we need to know here. One, we're going to need that power. Definitely going to need that power. Yeah. Secondly, there's more confidence in the renewables than there was before. And at this particular time, we find that about 12% of our current power comes from wind, which is about double what it was just not long ago. And that and we have kind of I put some Ontario goes through, I think, 137 terawatts per year of consumption, which averages out for a typical person about 9,500 kilowatt hours. And that's an enormous amount of power. If you can now double your renewables, that will add another maybe 5 or 10% of their power needs, which is respectable.
And the other thing now, of course, is that we are making great advances in battery technology, which may assist with much of the wind and solar supply. Anyway.
Yeah, unfortunately, the wind and solar is rather inefficient in that you can't rely on it. You can't.
Well,
and the wind can't be too strong, and obviously the wind has to be blowing, but it also can't be too strong, because if it's too strong, it doesn't work. And
that's the weirdest thing
is a big deal. Peak power, wind and solar are not good for peak power.
Yeah, peak power, but they're basically anyway, we talked about that a few times. It's good that they are. It's good that we are increasing the green consumption, and we're not actually, the other thing that's good about it is that we're not actually putting the cost really upon the consumer. Obviously the cost will go on the consumer at the end of the day, but we're not adding that surcharge, which is what I think the prior government was the big problem.
I think I think we can happily say here that up north of the United States, we have accepted the fact that wind and solar and other renewables are required. We do not deny the effects of climate change nearly as much as do the United States. The United States is in a state of denial, particularly the Republicans. However, they will embrace renewables if it makes money for them somewhere along the line, or their constituencies. But they've been in a denial phase far too long about renewables and how it can add to the grid. Now, the way the conservatives are doing it now seems to be a much better way. It's more like a real power generation initiative. I'm not so sure the sweetheart deals that the Ontario government gave to renewable, those people producing renewable power in the past was the way to go. But they can argue that they did kickstart the program, and that's what the Conservatives are building on now.
Yeah. Okay, so pro-Palestinian supporters are expected at the Democrat convention in Chicago.
Kamala, you can't hide. We won't vote for genocide.
Yeah, I thought the one that I saw today on this one was Bamela Harris. Don't comment on our vote. Bamela Harris, right? Don't know if I can say that one. Yeah, it's kind of weird, But anyway, and I'm actually looking at this when I was reading this article. It seems that they're kind of blaming, and I get it. It happens, that it's the way it goes. She's part of the current administration. So they're blaming the current administration, Biden, but they're saying that they won't vote for Harris, even though she's part of the current administration.
Well, she's got her hands bloody, doesn't she? She hasn't said anything about the Gaza thing. She has now, because it's important for her re-election. So those people who are opposed to what the administration has done in Gaza, she's trying to find a few of those that will switch over, and she talks strongly about Gaza. Right now, I expect a peace deal fairly soon, because Blinken has gone to Israel and talked to Netanyahu, and pretty much, I think pretty much he's put the hammer down. You accept this deal, or we're going to get you for this. Right now, the United States looks weak, and it looks like it's an enabler of the massive amounts of the massacre that's happening in Gaza. I say this again. The U.S. and the West will never, ever, ever be forgiven what they did in Palestine. They allowed this massacre to happen. 1,200 people died in Israel because of Hamas attacks. 40,000 have been killed.
Yeah.
Over 100,000 have been wounded and maimed. And the destruction of Gaza is nearly absolutely complete. There's no schools, no mosques, no hospitals left that function well. We will never be forgiven. And there's if I was Hamas, I would say one of our points for the peace deal is to make sure that international journalists come into Gaza immediately after the ceasefire. Right now, Israel has put up every kind of obstacle it can to the peace deal, but the Democratic administration is finally fed up, and I expect the deal to be announced within a week.
Yeah, but is it a week too late for the Dems?
That's what. Well, they don't want this. They don't want this on them in November when the election happens. They want this said and done with. They'll have enough explaining to do about Ukraine.
You think
but
the Americans
want this? What?
You think the Americans have got short memory? I think not.
Yes, as a matter of fact, Gore Vidal used to call the United States of amnesia. United States of America, not the United States of America, but the United States of amnesia. And we quickly forget. But I don't think you're going to be able to forget this. As soon as international journalists go into Gaza, it'll be years and years of reporting on that. And Mike Cushman, our listener, says, hope there is peace, but they have created another generation of people that will live for revenge. Well, yeah. Imagine if you're a kid there and you watch your family get crushed and you see everything around you being destroyed, and brutal Israeli soldiers acting with impunity everywhere they go. And this goes for the West Bank as well. The United States and the West always looking the other way on this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
It's a terrible payback. Why do you think people flew planes into the World Trade Center? Why do you think that happened?
Because they've been looking the other way for so long. Yeah.
Yeah. They've enabled the extremists. When you do that, when you keep ignoring justice for a people, you're going to radicalize those people, and they're going to support radical ways, and that's why planes flew into the Trade Center.
Yeah,
because these radicals were enabled by the actions of the West.
Yep, absolutely. All right. Okay, where are we now? Okay, so and former Niagara teacher is convicted of sex crimes and now is being granted day parole. Basically, what day parole is, they go out to do a job nominally, and then they go back to to prison.
Yeah, well, he's
convicted more than 30 years ago, being released on day patrol, despite the fact he continues to deny he sexually abused the victim. Right, and I think it's the continual denial that is, for many people, problematic.
That's a big issue, his denial. But I think another big issue here is the cost of incarcerating people. And I think you're going to get a lot of people let out of prison when they should not have been, due to the fact that they need space and it costs too much. Unfortunately, this guy, Paul Shepard, a resident of St. Catharines, his sexual invitation, well, he's been accused and convicted of that, and he claims he's innocent. However, he does admit to using corporal punishment in the private school in which he taught. Corporal punishment, of course, is using the strap or the cane or some other kind of physical painful methods of discipline, long gone in our public schools. And
this was 30 years ago. So this was 30 years ago, remember?
Still, 30 years ago, you weren't allowed to use corporal punishment.
No, I know. I'm just saying, I'm just trying to put that in its context. So it was 30 years ago, this was, right? And he was, yes, he's a resident of St. Catharines. He was convicted in Alberta in 2021 of sexual interference and invitation to sexual touching, and sentenced to less than 4 years behind bars.
Yes, I think the last half of his sentence, or maybe just the last 6 months, he'll be out on bail and day bail or something like that, or day parole. It describes it in the article.
Yeah,
the Parole Board of Canada earlier this month granted day parole and will serve the remaining 6 months of his sentence in a halfway house in Ontario. Now, it puts at risk, unfortunately, it may put at risk more kids. He's 61 years old now. He may not be as much of a risk as he was before, but he is a person in denial, and he has tried. And the first thing he wants to do when he gets out is to work with addicts and homeless people of that kind. But they are very, very vulnerable, those people. In particular, and if in a tent city, you've got some kids living there, do you really want to expose them to a guy like that? I don't know. Now, he may be innocent, as he says. He may have been wrongly convicted, but we can't be sure of that. So we have to keep him away from all vulnerable people. I don't know how he's going to rebuild his life. I don't understand minor attracted people, as the woke crowd likes to call them, minor attracted people, which means pedophile. So I don't understand what goes on in a pedophile's mind and where their desires come from. All I know is you have to keep them away from. What?
Why do we keep changing the name of that? Call it something that is utterly disgusting and leave it at that. Pedophile was a word that evokes horrors, and so it should do. And stop giving new names to things.
I don't know. It's a kind of a woke term, because when they're talking about all the different gender classifications we have now, the LGBTQY, XYZ, whatever it is, one of the ones that keeps creeping back into the picture is this thing called minor attracted people, meaning men, usually, almost always, who are attracted to children, either male or female, for some particular reason, some quirk in their mind or other thing. So they're kind of given a little bit of license. And if you remember, which is loath to recall for the LGBTQ community, that the pedophiles, the Man-Boy Love Association, and the Pi group in Britain were creeping in and associated with the gay movement at one time. And as a matter of fact, in 1980, the lesbians were not going to march in the Gay Pride Parade in 1980 because the pedophiles were running the show, or so they said. And they have since been rejected from those organizations, but they were part of them for a while. And that was because they thought free love of any kind was good. And they have since changed their mind on that, but it's creeping back in. Are we to accept minor attracted people? We can accept that they exist, but we can't accept the fact that their desires be satiated. You cannot put children in any kind of vulnerable position. It's just a non-starter.
Yeah. So the the thing is about one of the things about this story, though, is that it's not actually been put together well, right? Because first of all, it talks about a former teacher convicted of molesting a student more than 30 years ago. And the molesting a student was actually about, as you said, corporal punishment on a 12-year-old student at a private boys' school in Edmonton, and doesn't make it any less. But that's a different category than pedophilia.
I'm not so sure. Usually pedophiles get away with a lot before they get caught. So he got caught and convicted in this particular case. Something in the court made them go with the conviction. He may have had a history that, for some reason, I don't know. But I will say this: that people who usually molest children usually get away with it a lot before they finally get caught.
And so what Mike is saying is he gonna teach, and I hope not, right? I would hope not. But again, we treat and I'm in line with you, Mike. Repeat sex offenders should go to prison for life, and repeat drunk drivers should go to prison for life.
Yeah, or at least have a collar on them so everyone knows where they are at any time. They supervise. Well, this guy is supposed to be supervised. Yeah, and I do, and unfortunately, I think a lot of criminals
what supervision
are going to get out of prison because prison costs us a lot of money. Look what they did to Bernardo, for crying out loud. They put him in a minimum or medium security prison, because it was cheaper to keep him there. And they might say, well, it's because of humanitarian reasons. I doubt it. I think they put it there because it's less expensive to keep him there.
In a maximum security prison, it's more than $150,000 a year to keep a prisoner locked up.
Yeah.
And it's like, I'm sorry, but there are certain categories of people, and Bernardo is one of them. I'll pay that money. I'll pay that money every year. We should pay that money every year to keep them locked up.
Well, if anyone, like the idea that Bernardo was transferred to a medium and he's got television and he's got all this other stuff, I don't want to treat him cruelly.
Well, I don't want to treat him cruelly. I believe all of our offenders should have a right to, yeah, we're locking them up, but why don't they have rights to access to television and things like that? Everybody should have that right.
But more than someone in maximum security prison. The reason why maximum security prison is what it is to remove you from society and give you limited access to things. That's your punishment.
Yeah.
If you put them in a prison that's more like a hotel, then
we shouldn't be putting them in. Yeah, absolutely. But what I'm just saying is that even prisoners have rights to certain things, and without going into what those rights are.
Yeah.
And yeah, Mike points out that Carla Homolka has children.
Well, she's a real piece of work.
I think she was. Remember, I wasn't around at the time, but for everything I've read about this particular case, Homolka seems to be worse than Bernardo.
I think Homolka would be an amoral, cold person. She needed to meet a guy like Bernardo to be as bad as she was. Yeah. I don't think she's particularly intelligent, and I think she's amoral. She doesn't know the difference between right and wrong most of the time, I think. I mean, she killed her own sister, for crying out loud, and then complained that her parents were grieving too much about it. Seriously?
Yeah.
So there's something wrong in the brain there. But Bernardo, I don't know. Bernardo's got to go and stay in prison. But anyway, aside from that, this fella, I don't know if he's being treated fairly or not, but it is a red flag anytime someone convicted of sexual abuse of a child is put out on the street, and particularly the one that denies what has happened. So I don't know. Yeah, I don't think our friend William O'Sullivan's too happy about this.
Well, my thinking in relation to this is that it's that denial that usually the parole board look at issues like denial. Obviously it's not the parole board's job to look at the guilt or innocence, to be judging that kind of thing. They're looking in relation to how the person has behaved in prison, etc. And part of that is actually about acceptance of the crime, of their guilt.
They feel that his chance of recidivism is very low, and that's where they're letting him out. But how do you know? Like, I mean, the fact that he's 61 and maybe a lot of his sexual urges have gone.
Well, maybe, but not necessarily.
Possibly. I'm just trying to second guess
what
the parole board is thinking.
Yeah. And what we're second guessing on the outside, we haven't seen psychological reports, etc., which the parole board will have seen.
Yeah. And remember, he has admitted to the corporal punishment that he inflicted, which was supposed to be allowed in that private school. Those things he can't deny because everybody knows, he administered corporal punishment. But what he did during that time, administering that corporal punishment, is what he denies.
Yeah.
So there's something there he can deny because there's no witnesses except him and one other person. But the corporal punishment part, he can't deny because there was many more witnesses to it.
Yeah.
They knew that he did that. I mean, it's part of the school, I guess.
The interesting thing is, he told the board he wanted to volunteer in the community upon release, specifically with LGBTQ issues and with individuals experiencing addiction and homelessness.
Well, the fact that he's focusing on LGBTQ might be an indication of where he sees himself sexually, but the fact is they won't let him do it because that's a vulnerable community. Both of those communities, the addiction community and the LGBT community, could be viewed as a vulnerable community. So they're not going to let him do that.
Yeah. He said, and the board said working with vulnerable individuals could pose a risk to public safety and prohibited him from doing such work.
Yeah. So what else we got today?
Yeah. Okay. So, so Niagara growers are pushing back against that UN report that compared the temporary foreign worker program to slavery. I
expected this. Yeah.
Yeah, we knew they would. It was inevitable because many of our farmers around here rely upon the temporary foreign worker program, and yes, they would make such pushbacks.
Yeah. Now, one of the spokesmen here says it's ridiculous what they've said, that the Ontario workers are usually very well taken care of. There's laws and rules around them. They talk about one fella here, Bill George, Ontario Fruit and Vegetable Growers Association, find that report offensive, and so did I, actually, because I thought it was overstated from anything I've known in my experience about foreign workers. They usually are very happy to come here, and
many of them come year after year, and many of them have worked for the same farm for 20 or 30 years.
Yeah. So this guy said that one of the spokespersons here, they had the same 30 Mexican workers come every year, and they have the ability to change employers if they want to, or go somewhere else if they want to, or not come at all. And they say have the same 30 workers come every year. Obviously, those 30 workers are happy to come to the same employer every year. However, there is programs that the government does come down on those abusing the program. And I was surprised to find that right here in Niagara Falls, there's being fines laid out on people that abuse that system right here in Niagara Falls. And it's like restaurants and things like that who are abusing it, not where most of the temporary workers go, to the farms and so on. I think we've got about 20,000 people working on the farms every year. So the federal government has banned 12 employers from the program in 2023. Employers found to have violated the worker program listed in a public-facing website of Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada. The 3 Niagara companies are on that list. The most recent, Italia Pizzeria in St. Catharines. Why do they have a temporary worker? Don't you think you could rent? You get somebody from the community, right? So they go for a temporary worker, and then they abuse that, and so they were fined $30,000. So that's a pizzeria that was fined $30,000. So they were doing bad stuff. And the employer for the business, the Sushi Gardens in Niagara Falls, was fined $12,000 for abusing the temporary foreign workers. And so it's not the big employers, the big farms. And Juris Brothers Farms Incorporated in Niagara Lake fined $1,000, and that was not for providing documents only. So The federal government launched the migrant.
The document thing, that's probably, that's probably a slap on the wrist for not having filled in the right documents at the right time, right? It happens. That doesn't necessarily, it's a different category than things like the Italian pizzeria. That's a significant, it must be a significant breach if they were fined 30,000.
Yeah. And Sushi Gardens, 12,000.
Yeah.
So there are abuses. Generally speaking, however, there's abuses in employment everywhere in Ontario or Canada. Basically, you'll find abuses. However, for the most part, it seems to me that the UN report was way overstated.
Yeah,
super way overstated. And
it was
I think the guy was just looking for a little bit of a reputation.
Yeah, I think it was using too aggressive a language. Were there problems in the migrant worker program? Yes. Right. And equating it to slavery, as you say, there are some of these people have come from Mexico or Jamaica or somewhere like that, and they've been coming here for the last 30 years, and they do it every year, right? That's not slavery.
Back in the 70s, I worked with temporary foreign workers from Jamaica. They were, and some of them didn't even know English. They knew patois, but they didn't know English.
Yeah.
And sometimes it was hard to train them because they had never seen anything in the manufacturing process. I remember I had difficulty training a couple of them on how to stack skids. It took a while, but it got, I was able to do it. But they and I had a hard time talking with them because they only spoke patois, some of them. But most of them had come up and loved it because they make X amount of money and they go back. Most of them were not interested in staying in Canada. They may have wanted their kids to come to Canada for education or something like that. I never got into it much with them, but most of them got to the point where they were very, very happy with what they were doing because they could go back and have a good life for them and their families, which they couldn't otherwise have had.
Yeah.
Now, some of them wanted to become, I remember, what was his name? Leon, maybe? I forget. He was one Jamaican that wanted to become an immigrant to Canada, and he was trying his best to do that by making as many friends with Canadians as he could, see if he could get a sponsorship. Yeah. But most of the other ones they didn't intend to stay. Although you always got a runner.
By wanting to become a permanent Canadian resident, he was doing all the right things. He was looking at sponsorship, etc.
Yeah. Now I don't know how his fortunes fared over the long run. I only knew him for half a year, maybe. But the other guys were pretty happy. The idea that it's slavery, no. I mean, I watch what they do and the kind of work they've done. I've done that kind of thing too, and I've been poorly paid for some of it. But I don't know. I think it's a good program, and to cast unreasonable aspersions on the Canadian system when it's generally a very good system, it's not good, because if you start making trouble like that and people say, okay, well, maybe we shouldn't have temporary workers at all because it's going to be too much of a pain, that's going to affect the agricultural business around here, and it's also going to affect the bottom line of those people who come up here. They don't want so Mexicans come 30 years in a row, or 20 years and the same ones come back all the time. It tells you something, and they have the ability to since 2020, I think they have had the ability to complain. They have a hotline where they could talk with anonymity, complain about their employers. They can change employers if they want. So the UN spokesman saw what he wanted to see.
Yeah.
And
Mind you,
he also is probably looking for a bit of a reputation.
Mind you, also, there is a local group here called Justice for Migrant Workers, who've said that both levels of government have failed to adequately protect the foreign workers.
How so? How so? They like.
Well, we've heard this before, and again, I've not been convinced by what they've said.
No, either have I. And usually, when you find migrant workers complaining about something, it's usually because they want to become Canadian citizens. They figure, well, I've worked there for so long, I should become a Canadian citizen. Well, that wasn't the deal. The deal was
If you want to become Canadian citizen, there's a different route to becoming a Canadian citizen.
That's right. And if your application is rejected, but your application for a temporary foreign worker was accepted, that's a different process. Yeah. Now, I think they're allowed now CPP contributions or something like that. I don't. Overall, Canadian institutions are not that bad. I would
find it very difficult as to how would they get a pension if they retire, even because a lot of that they wouldn't get all of the pension anyway.
I don't know how it works.
Yeah.
But all I know is that most of them come up here and happily work. I remember talking in Dominica to a guy who got enough money working in farms closer to Windsor year after year that he was able to go back down to Dominica and invest in a business.
Yeah.
And and I don't know. I think a lot, and when I was in Dominica, by the way, I met people there that had lived in the United States for years and came back to Dominica and stayed. I also met people that lived in Toronto and Montreal and had jobs and everything. And then once they had worked for a certain amount of time, 30 years sometimes or 40 years, they would come back to Dominica and that's it. They're not coming back to Canada. They have, so they do have this desire for their home a lot of times. They want to go home to where they grew up, where they feel more comfortable. I don't know. I don't think, and I actually think this guy, the UN guy, overstated things. It's very offensive to a lot of the farmers.
Yeah.
But we do see by the article there are abuses, like Sushi Gardens and the Italia Pizza.
But come on, there are abuses in any system, Dave, right? And doing the work you've done over the years, doing the work, doing any job, there are employers that sadly abuse the system, right? They don't help anybody. They don't help the reputation of businesses, and there are employers that do help abuse the system. Fortunately, 99.99% of them don't.
No, I used to work for a temporary manpower when I couldn't get jobs. That was an abusive system. They would always say, "Oh, we might hire you on full time if you come here." They always say that everyone right. Because they wanted people to work, and you got paltry wages. You were working right alongside their own guys. I was making $5 an hour, and they were making $12 an hour, and I was doing the same job.
Yeah,
but they only needed me for a few weeks, and then they dump you. But they'd always say, we might give you a full-time job, So they want you to come every day and work hard, and then dump you. And I've worked in a bunch of different places like that. That is abusive.
And the interesting thing about that is you're making $5 an hour versus the full-time guy who's making 12, right? And probably your employer's making 25 at the same time as you're making 5.
Well, see, this was you might call it. I was a temporary worker in my own land. So I wasn't a foreign temporary worker. I was a temporary worker.
What I'm saying is the temp agency that employed you, they were being paid by the company that did the work. they were being paid $25 an hour, and you got 5 out of it.
No, they were probably getting about $2 an hour for every one of us because there was a lot of us.
No, a lot of these agencies get a lot more than that.
I don't
I've
think
seen
the
the
employer
paperwork.
would have hired us otherwise.
You see, their employer doesn't know how much you get paid.
I think it was I don't know. They had to bring us in and under whatever the employer was paying their other people.
Well,
Otherwise, they would have just given them overtime or something.
I'm just I did some research. I came across this on we employ a company I was working with employed a temporary worker to do some jobs, and they were disgusted by how little that temp worker was paid, considering how much, as I said, they were paid like $5 an hour, and the company spent $25 an hour to employ that person at $5 an hour. They were disgusted by it. And
where was that, in Canada or?
No, it was the UK thing. It was
yeah,
the UK thing.
Go.
But there's a lot of temp agencies. A lot of the temp agencies make a lot of money out of those who temp for them.
Yeah.
I've seen the paperwork. I've seen the accounts. I know it to be true.
Well, I was in UK, so I don't know how.
No, I've seen it in Canada as well. I've seen it in Canada as well.
Well, I think it depends. It depends on. I know I got a lot of these $5 an hour jobs.
Yeah,
and there are usually the ones nobody else wanted to do.
Yeah,
and,
I know.
So I do remember working, putting insulation in. I think it was the Fox or one of those hotels there, and what a job! I was getting so itchy. I was cutting insulation and putting it in and around windows. And a carpenter was watching me work. He says, "You're a good worker. You want to work for me?" He says, "How much are you making?" I said, $5 an hour. I said, "I'll give you $7 an hour. Come work with me." So I quit and I worked with him for a couple months.
Yeah. All right. Okay. Well, anything else on that temporary worker situation?
Yeah, I think it does no one any good to have a report like that, an overstated report. And unfortunately, there's a school of thought, an attempt to do Overton, what's called Overton, which means you exaggerate the position in order to get, in order to move the dial a little bit, you super exaggerate the position. So when there is something negotiated, it comes back to where it should. That doesn't really work. So I believe this UN spokesperson repertoire just overstated his position. He's looking for a bit of a reputation, I think, because it doesn't smell right when I read it. I'm sure there's abuses. I think these things could be changed and helped.
There's abuses, but we have rules to deal with those abuses, right?
That's right. We have abuses right here in Ontario and domestic workers, full-time workers, and there is usually a resolution somewhere around the way,
Yeah. And it's like with any system. We all know that with any system that we put in place, with any programs that we put in place, there are always those that flout the system.
My biggest issue with this is you want to make sure that the thing is run right, and you've got wholesale objection to this report from the government, from the employers, and so on. So if you keep coming up with stuff like that is unsubstantiated but causes suspicion and worry among the populace, you may have that whole program dismissed, and temporary workers won't come into the country anymore for some reason or other, and that cuts them out of possible employment. Now, so I think that's a a big thing, and particularly when we're going to and the abuses of the system here are two ways. For one thing, there's a lot of employers bringing in temporary workers. We've doubled that in the last few years, and they're working for peanut wages where a person in Canada could have had that job, like say at the pizzeria or something like that.
Yeah.
And they found a lot of abuses that way, where employers find an easy way of getting cheap labor, when they could have, and they may not be bad to the temporary worker. They may follow the rules, but the fact is we don't need that temporary worker. We have people unemployed at 6.8%. Yeah, you'll be able to fill that job without bringing a temporary worker in.
Yeah. All right. Anything else? I got no additional comments.
I don't know. I just
and Mike Cushman makes the point of that he's not so sure that really they should be working in restaurant and hotel businesses. He believes that to be an abuse, and I would tend to agree with him.
Well, I made the point years ago that I expected the temporary workers to start filling the jobs in restaurant and hotels around here because they don't pay well enough for people to survive. The average person here, with the cost of living and the cost of housing going way up, I expected temporary workers to be coming in and taking those jobs, because who's going to take, who'd really want to work them when you're making, I don't know, whatever the minimum is, $15 an hour, and your rent's cost you $1,000 a month for closet
or more
for a closet, and sooner or later it becomes untenable, you're unable to sustain a living that way. So people won't apply for them, and if they don't apply for them, the employer says, "Well, now time for some temporary workers."
Yeah. Okay.
And I don't have to pay them $7 an hour.
I think we can kind of call that quits, Dave.
Okay, doke.
All right. And I thank everybody for coming. And Dave?
Without further ado, I bid you adieu. And there's